The tax return came on a Tuesday. I was at the kitchen table with my third coffee, still in my scrubs from the overnight shift, and I almost didn't open it. I almost just put it in the pile. But I was tired of letting things sit in the pile. So I opened it. And there, in a field I had never seen before, listed quietly, as if it had always been there, was a dependent. A child. A child with a birthday that meant she had been conceived 14 months into our marriage. What nobody knew, not even me, not yet, was that the child wasn't the worst part. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did about it. But first, I need to tell you who I was before. Because who you are before matters. It matters because it's what they count on. I have always been the kind of person who finishes things. I don't know where that came from. Maybe my mother, who worked the same reception desk for 26 years and never once called in sick. Maybe just the way I was wired. But I have always believed, in a very quiet and private way, that if you just kept going, if you just held on long enough, things would eventually be what you'd worked for them to be. I met Daniel at 24. We were both in the waiting room of the same overpriced urgent care on a Sunday afternoon. He had a sprained wrist. I had a sinus infection that had been building for 2 weeks because I kept telling myself it would pass. Even then, even that early, I was the one who waited too long. He was funny in the way that feels like relief when you're stressed. Quick, deflecting, always finding the angle that made something absurd instead of awful. I remember thinking he was the kind of person who would make hard things easier. I wasn't wrong about that. I was just wrong about who the hard things would be for. We dated for 2 years, long enough for me to know his family, his anxieties, the way he made coffee wrong and wouldn't hear it, long enough to know I loved him. Not perfectly, but really. The way real love actually looks, which is patient and ordinary and sometimes quiet in a way that you mistake for contentment. I was a registered nurse. I had been working since I was 19. Nothing glamorous, floor nursing, long shifts, the kind of work that uses your body and your attention in ways that leave very little left over at the end of a day. I was good at it. I was proud of it, actually, in the way that people who do unglamorous things well tend to be proud, quietly, without expecting anyone to notice. Daniel had a degree that hadn't gone where he wanted it to. He'd studied architecture, had spent his mid-20s in firms he described as stifling, doing drafting work that he said had nothing to do with what he actually wanted to build. He had ideas. Real ones, I think, looking back. He talked about them the way people talk about things they're afraid to try. And I loved that about him. The ambition underneath the hesitation. I thought it just needed room. We got married when I was 27. Small wedding. My family, his family, a restaurant back room with good lighting. My dress cost $300, and I still think it was beautiful. We danced to a song I still can't hear. His firm let him go 4 months later. Budget cuts. Or at least, that's what he told me. I believed him. I believed him the way you believe the person sleeping next to you, which is to say, completely, and without it ever occurring to you to check. So I picked up more shifts. This is where the small, specific memories live, not the dramatic ones, the specific ones. I remember the year I worked Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, and the morning of my own birthday, because we needed the holiday pay. I remember calculating whether we could afford a weekend away and deciding we couldn't, and feeling something twist a little in my chest, and then turning off that feeling because there wasn't time for it. I remember Daniel at his drafting table at 11 at night, working on the portfolio that was going to change everything, and feeling genuinely proud. Proud that I was making that possible. Proud that we were a team. There was a detail that didn't quite fit, but I filed it away. His phone. He'd always been a little protective of it. Most people are now, I told myself. But sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, he'd flip it face down in a way that felt like a reflex. And once, when I picked it up to show him something I'd found funny, he was across the room and reaching for it before I'd even unlocked the screen. He laughed it off. I laughed with him. I put the detail in the pile where I put things I wasn't ready to look at yet. He got a commission 18 months in. Small project, a residential renovation for a friend of a friend. But it led to another one, and then a referral, and by year 4, he had a small client list and some recognition in local design circles. I was happy for him. I am still able to say that with complete honesty. I was happy for him. His success felt like ours. The way you think sacrifice is an investment.
By year 5, he said we should hold off on trying for children. The practice wasn't stable enough yet, and he didn't want to bring a baby into uncertainty. I agreed. I was 32, and the timing felt reasonable. We had time, I told myself. We had built something together. We had time. I don't know exactly when it started. That's the thing I've had to make peace with. I will never know exactly when he decided to become someone else, whether it was slow or sudden, whether it started before the commission or after, whether I was already being lied to at our wedding. I've had to stop asking that question because the answer doesn't change what happened, and it was destroying me. What I know is that the first clear sign came in year 6. I found a receipt, not for anything incriminating on its face. A restaurant I didn't recognize, a Wednesday, a bill for 2. I asked him about it. Business dinner, he said. A client he was cultivating. He said her name, Melissa, easily, without hesitation, the way practiced liars say things. I should have pulled on that thread. I didn't. I was coming off a 12-hour shift, and I wanted a shower. And the receipt went in the pile. The pile was getting very full. What happened next was quieter, and therefore harder to name. He started being more considerate, more attentive. He brought me coffee without being asked. He made dinner on the nights I worked late. He asked about my patients, not generically, but specifically, remembering the names I'd mentioned the week before. I thought we were entering a new phase. I thought the hard years had done their work and we were coming out the other side. I told my mother we'd turned a corner. She said she was glad. I was so sure. Year 7. He told me the practice needed a capital injection. He'd found a property, a small commercial space, that would allow him to take on larger clients, hire an associate. He had a business plan. He showed it to me on a Sunday morning over breakfast, printed out and bound, which I now understand was deliberate. The binding, the presentation, the Sunday morning. He knew I was most open then, most rested, most mine. We remortgaged the house. I want to say that clearly so it lands correctly. We remortgaged a house that I had been carrying the mortgage on,
largely alone for 3 years of his lean period, to fund the expansion of his practice. He presented it as our investment in our future. And I signed. I signed because I believed in him. Because that's what I'd been doing for 7 years. And it had felt like love. And I didn't know what else to feel.
The practice expanded. The clients came. He hired the associate. By year 8, he was earning more than me for the first time. I remember he took me out for dinner to celebrate. He said, "You made this possible. I want you to know that." He looked right at me when he said it. I cried a little. I thought they were good tears. I now know she was 3 months pregnant at that dinner. The tax return. Let me go back to the tax return, because this is where the architecture of everything collapses into a single Tuesday morning. The dependent listed was a child, 14 months old. Melody. Her name was Melody. Daniel had a daughter I had never heard of, who was 14 months old, who was listed on our joint tax return because she was, and this is the part that still makes me catch my breath, she was living with him. Not in a separate apartment, not a secret kept in a different city. She was living with him at his practice address. The address I had signed my name to, remortgaged my home to fund. I sat at the kitchen table until the light changed. I didn't call him. I didn't go to the practice. I didn't do any of the things I had imagined doing in the hypothetical moments when I'd allowed myself to imagine something being wrong. I sat there. I made a list. Not an emotional list, a factual one. The practice address, the business structure, the associate, who was, I already knew before I confirmed it, Melissa, the one with the Wednesday dinner, the client he was cultivating, the child they had together in the space I had funded, with the house I had mortgaged. I was very calm. That surprised me, the calmness. I had always thought, if something like this happened to me, I would fall apart. Instead, I felt something close to clarity. Like a room you've been moving around in the dark, and someone finally turns on a light. Everything was exactly where it had always been. I just hadn't been able to see it. I closed the tax return. I put it back in the envelope. I left it in the pile. And then I called my mother. My mother is not a dramatic person. When I told her, she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "What do you need?" Not, "I told you so." Not, "What are you going to do?" Just, "What do you need?" I told her I needed a week. She said she'd be at my door in 3 hours. I told her not to come. She came anyway. She is her own kind of stubborn. I have it too. He forgot about that. That week was the quietest week of my life. I went to work. I smiled at my colleagues. I laughed at the right moments in the break room. I ate lunch. I sent Daniel 2 texts. Normal texts. Nothing texts. The kind that said, "Running late, don't wait up." And "Can you get milk?" He replied to both. Warmly.
He replied warmly. I was not falling apart. I was doing something else entirely.
My mother's cousin is a family law attorney. She had been one for 30 years, and she had the particular quietness of someone who had heard everything twice and stopped being surprised. I sat across from her on the Thursday. I laid out the tax return, the remortgage documents, the business registration for his practice, and a folder of bank statements I had pulled that I will not describe in detail, except to say that the pattern was clear once I knew what I was looking at. She looked at everything for a long time. She looked at me. She said, "He's been very careless." Careless. That word. I've thought about it many times since. He had been careful enough to maintain a parallel life for years. Careful enough to keep a child a secret from his wife. Careful enough to smile at me over dinner while she was 3 months pregnant. But he had been careless in the ways that matter, the ways that leave a paper trail. He never imagined I'd look. And that, more than anything else, is what told me everything I needed to know about what he thought of me. I said less at home. That was the other thing. I went quieter. Not the angry quiet of someone shutting down, the purposeful quiet of someone listening. He talked more, to fill it, which is what people do when silence makes them nervous. He told me about clients, about a project going well. He mentioned Melissa once, casually, professionally, and I kept my eyes on my plate and said, "That's great," and took another bite of food. He relaxed. That was his mistake. I attended his practice's quarterly client dinner 3 weeks later. I had RSVP'd weeks before the tax return. It would have been stranger to cancel. I wore the dress I'd bought for our 6th anniversary. I was pleasant. I was warm. I made conversation with his clients and laughed at the right moments, and at one point, I caught him watching me across the room with something that looked like relief. Like he'd been worried, and now he wasn't. I smiled back. I even raised my glass. I had already spoken to a forensic accountant by then. I had already filed a preliminary consult with my attorney. I had already taken photographs of every document in the house that bore his name and mine. I had already begun the process of separating what was mine from what was ours, quietly and without error, in a way that could not be undone and could not be argued. The quieter I became, the less he watched me. That was his second mistake. I filed on a Monday. There is something deeply strange about the day your marriage officially begins to end. It does not feel momentous. It feels administrative. You sign things, you have a timestamp, you go home and the house looks exactly the same as it did when you left. And nothing about the room has changed. Except everything. He was served at his practice. I know this because my attorney's assistant confirmed it at 2:17 in the afternoon. And I was in the middle of a patient admission. And I kept going because there was nothing else to do. And because keeping going was the one thing I had always been good at. He called 11 times that evening. I let it go to voicemail. All 11. His attorney made contact the following week. The position they took was, and I say this with complete evenness, aggressive. That the practice was a marital asset he had built. That the remortgage had been a joint business decision. That any claim I was making to practice equity was an overcorrection. His attorney had not yet seen the forensic accountant's report.
The report was 43 pages. It documented in careful and specific detail the income that had passed through that practice over 4 years. It documented the salary Daniel had been drawing, not to our joint account, but to a secondary account I had not known existed. It documented expenditure that included, among other things, a lease on a residential property in his name alone. Melissa's apartment. Paid for, in part, with funds from a practice I had remortgaged my home to create.
His attorney went quiet after that. What followed was not triumphant. I want to be very clear about that. Divorce is not a victory. It is a different kind of exhaustion, quieter and more administrative than the first kind, but just as consuming. But what I got back was specific and real. The house, in my name, the remortgage restructured, the equity restored, a portion of the practice value, calculated fairly. And the student loans I had been paying quietly for 7 years, those went back to him. All of them. He wanted to talk. He called once more, weeks later, from a number I hadn't blocked because I didn't know it. He said he was sorry. He said it had never been about not loving me. He said, and I remember this word for word, "You deserved better." I know that. I said, yes, I did. I hung up. I sat down. I did not cry, which surprised me, because I had thought I would. I've been thinking about that for months, why I didn't cry. And what I've settled on is this. I had already done my grieving. Not for him. Not exactly. For the version of our life I had believed in. For the woman who worked Christmas Day so her husband could build something. For the 9 years of quiet, ordinary sacrifice that turned out to be funding something else entirely. I grieved that person. Deeply. And privately. And for a long time. But she wasn't gone. She just knew better now. The things I rebuilt were smaller than what I'd had. A different apartment, the same job, a few friends who had been waiting patiently for me to come back to myself. My mother, always my mother. Some evenings that were genuinely quiet in the way I had not felt in years. Not the quiet of someone managing a secret they don't know they're carrying, but the quiet of someone who has set something down. I still work nights sometimes. It's different now. Now when I come home in the morning, I make coffee the way I like it. I sit at the same kitchen table. Sometimes I think about that Tuesday, the envelope, the name I didn't recognize, the light changing in the room. I think that was the morning I found out. And also the morning I started. The two things happened at exactly the same time. I don't think about him much anymore. That might sound like a clean ending, but it isn't really. It's just what time does, eventually, when you let it. What I think about more is who I was before. The woman who put things in the pile, who turned off feelings because there wasn't time, who believed that sacrifice and love were the same thing, because no one had ever shown me the difference. I know the difference now. I know it in a way that you can only know things you had to pay for. And if any part of what I've said tonight sounds familiar, if you've worked double shifts for someone else's dream, if you've signed documents without reading them carefully enough, if you filed something away in a pile because you weren't ready, I want you to know something. You are not foolish for having loved that way.
and you are not too late to put the coffee down and open the envelope. If my story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe to Vengeance Verity. I share a new story every week. Real pain, real silence, real justice. And if this one hit something deep inside you, hit the like button. Share it with someone who would understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone else know they're not alone either.